Hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of Ainslee Hooper Chats with. And this week I have with me Karen Hedley. So hi Karen, how are you?
Hi Ainslee, I'm good. How are you?
Yeah, good, thank you. Would you like to introduce yourself and tell everyone who you are and things? Just introduce yourself.
Yeah, sure. My name's Karen. I live in Canberra. I've been here for over 20 years. I have been working in the disability community for over 30 years, so pretty much my whole career. Done heaps of different things within that, employment, accommodation, sexuality, education, lots of exciting stuff. And then I considered myself a woman with disabilities about 5 years ago. And so that's been kind of interesting, sitting on both sides of that fence. And then to add another layer to it, my kids have autism, so I also advocate for that on their behalf as well, and help them navigate the world.
Wow. So you've been doing a lot in the area. Wow, that's fascinating. So tell me, because you said that you wouldn't have considered yourself to have a disability until 5-7 years ago. What got you working in the sector for that whole time? Like that's such a long time.
Yeah, it's a bit of a funny story, and it's a little bit embarrassing, but anyway. So I was lucky enough to finish school and go to university when university was free. So HECS didn't come in until after I'd started university. So I went to university and did a visual art degree because I didn't know what to do with my life. So I thought 3 years of creating art would be fun. So I went and did that. And then realised that I couldn't get a job out of that. So I did a teaching diploma. And then one of my mum's friends actually asked me she was like the admin reception person at the local special school. And she asked me if I would be willing to go and teach there. And I was like, oh, I don't think so. Because when I was at high school, I'd walk to school and I was always late. And the bus full of special school, the special school bus would drive past me, and a lot of the kids would yell at me, and sometimes they'd spit at me and that kind of thing. And so I was really I'd get really anxious over that. And so I was like, I don't know if I could, and I'll just come and give it a try. And so I did, and that was I really enjoyed it. Yeah, I think it was probably just that fear of the unknown, and but yeah, once I did it, I really enjoyed it and just never kind of looked back.
Wow, interesting. So we were talking earlier, and you were saying how basically that you didn't identify as having a disability till a few years ago. So do you mind telling us a little bit about that?
In terms of deciding to identify?
I'm very interested in, for myself, I've got a physical disability, and congenital, so I was born with it. So what I'm interested in is, what life has been, first of all, I guess, yes, what got you to identify as having a disability, and what was life for you like beforehand, as opposed to now?
Yeah. Well, in terms of identifying, I guess, so around the same time that my son was diagnosed with autism, and I started getting some of the symptoms. Oh no, that was a bit later. I actually started working at advocacy for inclusion here in Canberra with Christina Ryan, and that's where I really started to learn a lot about rights and the legislation and all of that, self-advocacy, all that kind of stuff. And I think I've always really liked the part in the Disability Discrimination Act that is kind of like a disability is when a part of your body or your mind doesn't work the way that most people's do. I really like how broad that is, and almost that it's kind of like, I mean, it's not specifically saying you can self identify, but yeah, I kind of like that. So my youngest actually has celiac disease, and I wouldn't necessarily consider that a disability, but I am quite well aware that it fits under the Disability Discrimination Act, and that
Right.
there have been cases go to the Human Rights Commission about, not being given gluten-free food. But I
Mm-hmm.
guess I just had it gave me a different perspective on what disability was, and, how you could see if you believed you had a disability or not. And I know a lot of other women in particular who have very similar conditions to what I
Mm-hmm.
have
Mm-hmm.
and don't identify as disabled, and I think that's fine. That's their choice.
Mm-hmm.
In some ways, I think it's quite a powerful thing to do, because I feel like I've been accepted into a community that
Mm-hmm.
is very supportive. But yeah, so I started having some symptoms probably about 10 years ago now. And before that, I was kind of like super mum. Like, I had 3 children under 3. They're in cloth nappies. I cooked all their food from scratch. I sewed all their clothes. Like, it was ridiculous. So I was always doing stuff. I was very social. And then I just started to be really tired, have pain, that kind of thing. And then it took, I didn't get a full diagnosis until 2014, so it took quite a while. But even then, at that point, I was having, I was tired, I had some pain, but it wasn't really interfering with what I could do.
Mm-hmm.
I had to reduce my hours at work a bit, but that still wasn't too much. And then I think it was like 2016, it just really started impacting my life. I was really struggling to work. I hardly leave the house unless I absolutely had to, because,
Mm-hmm.
even just going for a coffee with someone was exhausting. My pain levels skyrocketed, and yeah, so it has gone up and down over the years.
Mm-hmm.
So I've had times when I've struggled to work at all. At the moment, I'm working 24 hours a week.
Mm-hmm.
But working that much means that I don't do anything outside of work.
Right.
I still
Okay.
don't, yeah, I still don't have a social life. I still need help around the house, that kind of thing, because working kind of takes all my spoons away.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, yeah, I've gone from like kind of super mum, and my kids don't remember because they're only teenagers now. It's
Yeah.
kind of sad that they don't remember when I used to do everything for them.
Oh,
Now they're
yeah.
used to having support workers come in and do everything for us. So,
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I'm going to ask you that you mentioned spoons. So because, and it's something I've seen people mention and read about, but I don't quite understand it, because is that more of something that people talk about from the autistic side of things, or I'm interested
yeah.
as to where this has come from, and yeah, what it actually means, because I don't
Yeah.
understand it from my perspective.
I think it came from chronic illness
Okay.
kind of community, and then it spread out. And I do see it a lot with autistic adults and stuff. To be honest, I'm actually not a fan of the spoon theory. I just said it because more people know what it is.
Okay.
I actually like the idea of mobile phone battery. So,
Okay.
you mobile phone, you charge it up.
Yep.
Sometimes as it gets older, you can't charge it all the way. It won't quite charge all the way. It goes down quicker when you're doing particular activities. Some things, if you just kind of got it sitting next to you, it'll go down slowly. But if you're playing a game, it goes down really quickly.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it just dies altogether out of the blue. Sometimes you can charge it up. You might be able to just, put in a few minutes charge. So,
Mm-hmm.
and then get a little bit more energy. So I kind of like that one. That one feels more relatable to me. With the
Mm-hmm.
spoons, it's that you get a certain number of spoons a day, and then each thing that you do will use, a spoon or 2 spoons or 3 spoons, and then once you're out of spoons, you're out of spoons.
Right.
That,
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess if you're looking at a battery icon on a mobile phone, you see the bars, and so the spoons would be the bars. Is that what it's that?
Yeah,
Yeah.
similar, but I think the mobile phone one kind of gives you that flexibility of the like I'm a very visual person, so I find
Yes.
the visual of the battery and the fact that you can charge it a little bit or not, that kind of thing just works better for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because for me, when I think of spoons, I think of a drinking game that I used to play.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
I have played that, but actually didn't realize it was a drinking game. I played
yeah.
it with my kids.
Oh yeah. No, yeah, I played it. The only time I played it was a drinking game, and the idea was that you take a shot. So, say for example, we might have. I think we played it with 5 people,
Yep.
and so there's 4 spoons, and so basically you take a shot, and then you grab the spoon, and and the person who is the last who doesn't get a spoon, they've got to take a shot, and so
Ah.
and then it just gets it goes lower and lower and lower. And yeah, I completely lost.
Yeah, well, the game I played is actually a card game, but again, you have to grab the spoon. So obviously, it's the kid-friendly version of the game.
yeah, yeah. Oh no, that was that, and that would have been about 20 years ago. Wow, time has crept on.
Yep.
Wow. So, Karen, I've asked every guest that I've had on the podcast, what are the 10 things that you'd like people to know about disability? Because we all experience it differently. And so we all have different things that we do and don't like about it. So what have you got in your list about what you'd
Yeah.
like people to know?
So I didn't quite get to 10, but I do have a bit of a list. I think I've got 7. And I guess I should explain that the past kind of 10 years of my work has all been in rights and policy and communication and that kind of thing. So a lot of these fit in either under that
Yep.
or from my own personal experience. And, I want people to know that disabled people have rights, and we have rights just like everyone else. And I think that's really easy to forget with
Yes.
like, guardians and support workers and all that kind of stuff. But absolutely, same rights. I think some people get scared about how they can interact or help people with disability. For me, I know some people don't like being helped. For me, I often need that help. And I think just ask, like, I don't have an issue with, oh, can I help you at all? It's like I would ask anyone that anyway, not just the person with disabilities. But yeah, so just ask, well, is there anything that I can do different that would make this easier for you?
Yeah.
I think just be aware of all the barriers. Like, just try and think what things, if you're setting up a podcast chat, what are the things that this person actually might find difficult in this? And it's different for everyone. So it's not just that there isn't a ramp at the building, which is obviously, an absolutely huge barrier that affects a lot of people. But it can be things like, I sat in a meeting where they've sat me on the table and they've all sat in front of the window. So I can't actually see any of their faces because they've got the light coming in behind them. So it's those kinds of little things that, what's going on here, and, what can I do differently that's going to make this a better experience for the person. I think intersectionality, it took me years to actually kind of not get my head around what it was, to remember what it was called. But that's that idea that, so a person with disabilities has barriers. A person who is female or non-binary with disabilities has an extra layer of barriers. And a person who's from, doesn't speak English as their first language, or a person who's from First Nations community has another layer of barriers. So it's looking at all those different layers of intersectionality and how that impacts on how people can actually be included and participate in things. This is a really big one, and this is one that I guess came from me from my kids and supporting them. But what's good for people with disabilities is actually good for everyone.
Yes.
So, and the example that I like to give there is that my kids have autism, and they recommend social stories, which are like a story of what's going to happen with pictures and simple words. And for the most part, my kids weren't really into social stories, but we did it for school camp for my son, and we were chatting. I was chatting with I think it was the deputy, but about his anxiety, and she said, "Oh, we've got a lot of kids who are really anxious. Like, you know, they haven't been to camp before, blah blah blah, haven't been away from mum and dad." And I said, "Well, you've got this big digital screen in the hall. Why don't you actually put the social story up on the screen and have the whole year go and look at it?" And they did it, and they were like, it was fantastic. The kids were feeling so much better afterwards. So yeah, and a lot of those little kind of changes and supports that people with disabilities need really benefit everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. So just tell me that the screen, the social story, what was actually on the screen?
I never really got right into the social stories, and there is a particular way of phrasing what the text is in it. But for instance, it might say something like, I eat my breakfast and dinner in the food hall, and then there might be a photo inside the food hall, a photo outside showing the outside of the food hall, that kind of thing. So it kind of describes what is going to happen or what is happening. But then it has the visuals to go along with it as well.
Right. So is the idea of this to have children see this and know what's going to happen, so therefore their anxiety is reduced?
Yeah, and a lot of people with autism, particularly kids, have really high anxiety about change in particular. So that kind of transition, any transition between one thing and another, is something that you really have to provide support through. And help them learn how to manage that. And so this was part of that. It's like we're going to be transitioning from school and home to camp. So this is what you can expect. This is what will be happening. This is what it looks like. These are the things we'll be doing, but in a very kind of structured way. So normally, if you were talking to kids who didn't have autism or didn't have anxiety, for instance, you might show them some photos, but you just kind of talk through everything. If you wrote it down, you might kind of just write what things are, maybe. I don't know. So the general idea of it isn't specific to autism. Probably the way the text is written is quite specific to autism, but it's also very, very useful to everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the thing, like, it's just interesting, like there is universal design out there, but it's still something that people aren't getting their heads around. Like, I guess in the general community, a lot of people are still thinking about accessibility and like inclusion as something extra. Are you finding that still?
Yes.
Like an add-on kind of thing.
Yeah. And I was just also thinking while you were saying that as well, is that people tend to think of ramps, and they tend to think of braille or captions, or they've got a fairly narrow idea of what accessibility and inclusion is. And I really like to look at the whole picture. So
Absolutely. And
what you see, what you smell, what you feel, how you can move.
Because that's a phrase I use a lot when I'm talking about my business, is holistic accessibility. So it's the every single thing. So the way I look at it is every single thing that I'm going to start again with my thinking, because I have a habit of thinking and talking at the same time. So it's not very, but so basically this is how I look at it. I look at it as a person. If a person has to ask for assistance, then that's not accessible. Then whatever they're asking assistance for isn't accessible. So therefore, it's just a, so it's a wide ranging thing. And I also talk about invisible barriers.
Yeah.
And I get asked a lot, well, what are invisible barriers? And it's a hard one to answer, because those invisible barriers are going to differ from person to person. So yeah, there's not, I wouldn't say that there is sort of standard invisible barriers. I think it's all an individual basis. Would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. But I do think there are some things that you can do to try and meet the needs of most people.
Yeah.
Like, for instance, maybe not having perfumes or deodorants or whatever in your workplace. For some places that's really extreme, but for others that's quite not, natural thing to do, and there's a lot of us that appreciate that. Always writing in very simple language, whether it's an actual easy read or whether you're just writing in very plain English, trying not to use jargon, explaining what the jargon means. And I think people aren't used to thinking about things that way, but
and it's
so
easy.
Important.
It's interesting because those two things that you mentioned, the smell and the reading things easy, that's not like when I was working in an office for 20 years, that was something that was brought up again and again and again, like, because like after lunch, women would grab their deodorant out of their drawers and spray it on, and it's like they'd have to be reminded that you can't do that, because there were people in the office that had sensitivities, migraines, etc. So all these things, they don't just help people with disabilities, they help everybody. And that's where, we've got to sort of get more, I think, that needs to become more of a thing. Accessibility isn't just for people with disabilities, it's for everybody. And we just got to get that whole way of thinking across. So
I think a lot of the time, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think a lot of the time people think about themselves, which is a very natural thing for human beings to do. But if you're, say, writing a document or setting up a meeting, you think, okay, what do I need to do? What would I need in this meeting? And to be truly kind of inclusive and accessible, you need to think, what might all the people in this meeting need? It's not just about me.
And that's an interesting point, because until you've encountered all these different things, you don't actually know that they're going to be needed. So that's a difficult hurdle for people to get past. I was doing a Zoom the other day, and so I joined this meeting, and this meeting had about probably maybe 20 people on Zoom. And also there was a person there that was deafblind. And so they had the captions on, and they also had somebody signing. And I'd never seen someone signing on Zoom before. So for me, that was the whole thing, a new thing as well. And, how do you even get, Auslan interpreters to join? Those are the sort of things that are new to me as well. So I'm learning all that too. And it's just when you look at accessibility, it's such a huge industry. Like, there's where one thing I did notice was when I did a Google search for accessibility, the two things that came up for the majority is web design. Web design, documents, and the ramps and the steps. So that I think we need to have, when people search for accessibility, we need to see more things popping up so people understand that it's more than those three things.
I was just thinking, actually, it's a good industry to be in, because our society and community is changing so quickly that the idea of what inclusion and accessibility has changed to try and keep up.
Yeah.
And then most of the community is kind of right back here. We're up here, and then there's people's needs are up here. Yeah, so we're always trying to bring people forward, but I don't think it's going to change anytime soon.
Yeah, and that's an interesting one because have you seen the documentary Crip Camp?
No, I actually haven't yet.
Yeah, so that was really interesting for watch, and that's I think that's still on Netflix. And yeah, so it's fascinating to see. It was about this place that where the people with disabilities went for like on summer camp, and it was American, and basically these civil rights or these rights activists, disability right activists, and how they were fighting for access and inclusion all the way back in the 60s. And so then they're still fighting for it now. Like, it's just, I didn't realize just how long these fights have been going on for. And because you and I are both part of the Disability Leadership Institute, and I think it was a conversation that we saw talking about the different protests that have been happening all over the years. Like, it's just, and it's funny, like, even though I've had a disability all my life, to see all these things that have been going on for years that I just took for granted, that it's such an eye-opening thing. Yeah.
I think there's a lot of people out there, disabled people, but also their families and friends and that kind of thing, that never see that other flip side of rights and intersectionality and the barriers. Like, they're never exposed to that, so they have a very different experience of disability, and quite interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a case of people to see things and accept that that is the way that they are, the way things, that's the way things are, and don't get to see the difficulties that are happening, which show that the way things aren't necessarily working, that we do need that change. Yeah,
it's one of the challenges for us, isn't it? Is being able to kind of lead the way without leaving people behind or making them feel like they aren't good enough, or they aren't, you know, in terms of like businesses and organisations trying to get them to be more inclusive. But if you kind of start up here on the theme, you know, they're going to be like, well, that's impossible, I can't do that. So it's
exactly
kind of like,
right.
starting from where they are.
It's exactly. So I know that in the past, when I've approached businesses or when I've talked to business owners about accessibility, and I'm not just talking about the ramps and steps that we've discussed earlier, but when I've talked about it to them, they're like, oh, we're doing this, or it's too expensive. And that's just one of the things I hear again and again and again. Oh, it's too expensive. And so there's that barrier, rather than, it's hard to get them to see the end result of what things would be like if those issues were addressed.
And to be honest, they're not wrong. I actually think the government should have a kind of accessibility fund set up, you know, so that if a business wants to write their contract in easy read, you know, they can apply, they can get a few $1,000s to have that done. I really feel that should be available to be used in any way that's going to make a business more accessible.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because there was one thing I was thinking about earlier this year before COVID hit, and it's sort of at the moment it's on hold. But like, I was just thinking about this particular thing that I thought would make the shopping experience for people with disabilities easier, but it wouldn't just help people with disabilities; it would help everybody. But then it would be a matter of, okay, so this thing may be expensive. So therefore, how do you get shop owners to, implement this change when, it's really more a societal issue. So therefore, yeah, why should the business wear the cost when it's like with the NDIS, there should be something, as you say, there should be something that doesn't just help us, the people with disabilities, but also helps those who are trying to help us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In terms of the business owners, I was just thinking, it's that whole idea that you've got to invest to make money, and I think they get that in terms of marketing, and they get that in terms of like their systems that they use, but about getting them to get that it's the same with accessibility inclusion, and they're still in that headspace you were talking about where it's an add-on.
Yes,
so,
yeah. It's like, yes, we're trying our best, but this is we're stuck in what we can do, and yeah, so it's trying to get people out of that mindset, yeah, and looking at ways to be able to help them help us. Yeah. So going back, earlier on, you were talking about things that you've been doing over the last 30 years in you said you started off in policy, is that right?
No, policy was fairly recent, but it was actually like policies and procedures, not kind of an overarching type governmental policy.
Okay. Yeah.
So I one of my most recent jobs was a policy and procedure project to rewrite them all, reformat them all, and I basically was able to, I rewrote them all into plain English, and then developed easy read sets to sit alongside them as well. But this particular, I'm not entirely sure how it happened, but this particular organisation had hundreds of policies. It might have been like 300 or something. It was incredible how many policies they had, and so a lot of my job was working out how they all fit in together, and then like combining them all. And I think talking about disability, I think this is one of the ways in which my disability has actually really helped me, because so I have ADHD, but I also have like brain fog and memory stuff. So things need to be really clear for me to read them and remember them and understand them. So I've become really good at being able to do that, like to read something that's complex and then make it into the simple, and kind of, and it's not just about the words, it's about the order, the formatting, everything.
Right. Yeah.
So that's kind of, I'd done a little bit of that sort of work, but that job was the one where I was like, you know what, I actually really enjoy doing this.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. I love that feeling of finding something that you just absolutely love doing, and yeah, fascinating. So just, I mean, one of the things you were talking about earlier also was about the asking people for whether or not they want assistance, because that's a big thing that I've seen, I guess, like people talking about is that, and even like people on the other side, the carers, etc. Being unsure about whether or not they should ask people, or that's an interesting one, because I guess it's an individual experience, I would say.
And some people don't even like being asked because they've had too many people assume and do.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
But I still feel that it's better to ask than it is to not.
Absolutely. Yeah. I do. It's an interesting thing. I feel sorry for the people without the disabilities who are sort of, they're in this space of, well, should I or shouldn't I, or that it'd be such a hard thing to stand back and want to help, but being in that scared position of what's the right thing or what's not. not the right thing. Yeah.
I think I try to see it as, is this something that I would do for anyone? Um, and if it is, yes, I'd definitely do it. Like if I saw someone struggling with heavy bags, I would offer if I could help them.
Yeah.
Depending on my physical capability on the day, of course. But but then if it is someone that I can see has a disability, and I think, oh well, I wouldn't normally ask someone else, then I maybe kind of see and think about, is this the right time to ask or not? And I think you kind of know, like, and it's the way that you say it as well. Like if you talk to someone like you would talk to anyone, they're highly unlikely to become offended. But I think there's you know, some people treat people with disabilities like children, or and that it's more about the way that you ask that can be an issue than the actual ask.
Yeah.
Or the doing, people who just assume and do the help rather than ask.
Yeah. And that's where I think it's interesting now, because I've seen people in the past where they have asked a person with, like, I've seen, like, witnessed it myself, where I've seen people ask another person with a disability if they needed help, and that person would just go off at them and just say, no, I don't need help, rather than just say, no, thank you. But no, that it was so. Yeah, those experiences, I think, scare people from wanting to do what they think would be the right thing. Yeah.
It's unfortunate, although I can see, kind of sitting on all sides of the fence these days, I can see why that happens.
What you know, and so from your perspective, why do you think that does?
I think, well, for my children, for example, and they're what I was thinking of, every year at school, it's like starting fresh. So we have to work with the teachers. We have to, you know, my kids don't cope well with that transition from one year to the other anyway. And then it's like all the things that you've told the year before and that you've had in place the year before, they just kind of, they forget about them or they lose them. And so my son's 17 and he was diagnosed at 7. So for 10 years, I've been doing that. And then for one child, and then, you know, for like 8 years for the second child. And, you know, and that becomes really wearing. You kind of get a bit sick of it, really. And sometimes it's hard to remain the kind of calm, collaborative. And I think for a lot of people with disability, if you have been treated like a child most of your life, then if someone talks to you in that way, like it's really difficult to deal with. And I think a lot of people with disability and their family have been asked if they need help. And when they do say yes, which can be a huge thing, because we all want to be independent and we don't want to have to rely on other people for help. And so we finally say, yes, actually, I do need help, and then the help doesn't come. Like that happens So I think there's an awful lot for people with disability and the people in their lives that can make them respond in certain ways that make things more difficult. But it's about the support. So I guess it really is chicken and the egg. But hopefully as we start providing more support and more inclusion, then people will not need to respond or not need. They won't be in a situation where they feel that's the only response they can give.
I like when you said about the chicken and the egg, because that's exactly what it's like in the disability space when it comes to certain things. It's like, and really, I can apply that to so many things that I'm thinking about, where I ramble on a little bit, because that's it. It's like it's trying to, figure out how things should be done. But it's the whole chicken and the egg. It's just, So one other thing I wanted to touch on is because I'm in Victoria and you're in ACT, is that right? Yeah. So obviously, you know, with COVID, everything going on, what's been your experience with COVID in regards to, I guess, for yourself and also for your children? How's COVID impacted your experiences with disability, etc.?
Yeah, it's been really interesting. I think our experience has been a bit different to everyone else's, and that's partially because we've had a lot of stuff going on personally for us. In April, we actually moved. We moved house, we moved town, so we were living out in the country, and that was right about the time that our first isolation period started here. And we were planning on moving, but we were going to be staying there a bit longer, and then all of a sudden they started talking about lockdown, and I was like, oh my god, we've got to move now. So I think in some ways that almost kind of shielded us from a lot of that first isolation lockdown stuff, because we just had so much to do to get moved in and that. But obviously for people with autism, people with anxiety, just that not knowing, and I think everyone's feeling this, but it's kind of like, you know, a bit of a sliding scale. And because things change so quickly, like it was almost impossible not to have anxiety over the changes, because it would be like one day they'd be like, no, we're not going to be locking anyone down, that won't be happening. And 12 hours later, okay, isolation starts tomorrow. And I think that was really difficult to cope with. And, you know, for the kids suddenly having to be at home and doing school, my kids could not cope with that. So they basically did almost no school. Luckily, I have a really flexible workplace, so I worked from home a day or two a week anyway. And so it wasn't as big an adjustment for me, other than always having my kids here, which was interesting. But I guess what's been really interesting for me is that here in the ACT, they're kind of saying, if you've got any symptoms of a cold or a flu, get tested.
Yeah, same here.
And winter, hay fever season, 3 kids who then went back to school, so they've been back at school, I think it's just this term, I can't quite remember, but anyway. So we've actually had to be tested, I think, 5 separate times.
Right.
And in that 5 separate times, we haven't been able to then have any support in the house.
Right.
And yeah, I find that really interesting. And I actually posted in a Facebook disability group for the ACT and said, do you know any organisations who will actually come in? Because I was like, surely there must be like some ex-nurses, or like, you know, they provide them with the, what is it, PEP? Yeah, PPE.
Yeah.
You know, surely there must be someone who's willing to do that. And nobody knew of anyone. So I just find that really interesting. I'm not sure, because the first time it happened, we were actually living in Yass, and the organisation just said we can't come in. Like, so they went and did some grocery shopping and left the groceries on the step and that kind of thing, which was great. But they would not come in. And since then, I've just kind of been like, oh, we're being tested for COVID. Probably shouldn't come. I don't know whether that's actually their policy or whether it's just because I say that.
Right.
But I find that really difficult to have no support, because I can do things, but, you know, then I could do less other things, and I'm still trying to work and care for the kids, and as well as then trying to do all the stuff around the house. And so I think we've all found that quite stressful in some ways. But on the other hand, suddenly having to cancel all our therapies and appointments has been wonderful.
Yeah.
Because with 4 of us having disabilities, I tend to be on the go a lot to appointments. And yeah, so that bit has been nice. But yeah, luckily the tests are now coming back quite quickly. So in Canberra, we've even had one that only took 11 hours to come back.
Oh, that's good.
yeah, at the start they were taking 2 or 3 days. So,
Oh, who
yeah.
have we got here?
This is Luna. She was just handed to me.
Lena's beautiful.
Yeah, she is.
Hmm.
Yeah, but I think it's been a really interesting experience. I know there's a lot of discussion about whether the way that we're working now and the flexibility and accessibility that we've had, that it'll have to stay, but I've kind of doubted that all along. I don't know, it might be different down in Melbourne where you've actually been in lockdown for a lot longer. It's had a bigger impact. But I feel like here we kind of got off so lightly that I don't know. Like, I know there's some government departments that are now saying everyone must be back full time.
Right,
and even though we don't have cases here, we have, a lot of interstate people. And
yeah. So I'm in a regional part of Victoria. So I'm about an hour away from Melbourne. So for us, it's been locked down since March. So I could count on my hand, on my 2 hands, the number of times that I've been outside. So it's been interesting, but like for the support side of things, that's been interesting as well, because at the beginning it just felt like there wasn't any kind of thing in place for people with disabilities. It was actually a case of, if you get sick, we don't know what's going to happen to your supports, and that was scary, because I rely on that every day. So for me, that was extremely stressful. And then I think eventually we sort of started to get a drip down information from DHHS as to what would happen. So I do know now that if I did happen to get sick and get COVID, that they do have a workforce ready to jump in and basically come in and do what they need to do if it was the case that I was COVID positive. So I'm lucky that I haven't had to have a test done as yet. So that's been good. But I guess like for someone like yourself, having your supports for you and then having to have supports for your children, that would just be that's a double barrel. Like, I couldn't imagine that, especially when you've got things going on yourself. That part I couldn't imagine. At least for me, it's just I just have a daily person come in every morning and that's it. So
it is interesting. I do so I did actually have another couple of points written down in my 10 things, but then the next one was actually about that whole invisible disability thing, and I think like it's getting more exposure now, and I think people are getting on top of people can have disabilities and I can't see them, and they kind of get that. But I find it's really hard because my primary disability is my fatigue. So, after I've sat at this desk now and we've been talking for nearly an hour, I'll have to go and lay down for probably an hour or so.
Wow.
At the end of the day of work, sorry, my daughter keeps bringing me cats.
Oh, that's all right. I love cats.
At the end of my day of work, I usually have to go and lay down for 2 or 3 hours before I can actually get up and think about dinner or putting a load of washing on or anything. And that's really hard, I think, for people to understand how that actually impacts you. And like, we just kind of have this idea if you're tired, like you just need to go to bed earlier. I think people really struggle to get their head around what kind of, and I don't have chronic fatigue, but that kind of chronic fatigue thing, how that actually affects you and what it looks like.
Because and then that's got to be hard as well, like their whole invisible disability. Do you feel like do you feel you have to justify yourself a lot?
I've actually been lucky and never had a problem in a disability accessible parking.
Yeah.
I don't know how I've managed to get away with that, but anyway. I think maybe because I've always been really upfront about it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Since I've identified as disabled, that maybe like the last couple of jobs I've had, I've actually gone into them saying, I have a disability and this is what I need from you if I'm going to take this job.
Okay. Yep.
So, yeah. And so I've been lucky that I've had that kind of flexibility. But I think one of the biggest things for me, and I keep saying it to people, but I don't know how you ever get around it, is that with the fatigue, you just, like, I can't work more.
Yes.
And so it really limits our capacity to live at a certain level. I don't qualify for DSP because apparently I work too much, even though I can't afford to work less. Yeah, and I just find, like, it's great to have flexibility. I love it that, especially at the moment working from home, I'll work the morning, I'll go and lay down for a couple of hours, and then I come back and work into the evening, and that's actually been really good for me. But, you know, there are days when I can't work at all. And then I feel this immense pressure to make those hours up because I can't afford not to. Yeah, one organisation I actually worked for actually had this, and I can't remember what it was called, but it was like a special support program, and it was for people with like serious and chronic conditions could apply, and they provided some financial support in like paid leave and that kind of thing. And so I actually applied for that, and I was turned down because my condition wasn't severe enough. They said you have to have something like cancer or something, and I was like, maybe you need to reword what you're actually saying. But the other thing is, you know, this is my life. This is because my condition's degenerative. Like, it's only going to get worse from here on in, and I you know, I really struggle with that.
Yeah. It's an interesting one you're talking about, like getting denied. Like, I had to go through a process years ago to get assistance when I finally started needing extra help, and like the hoops that you had to jump through, and like it was just basically you felt like you had to slot yourself into this what they wanted a person with a disability to look like to be able to get the stuff. And I was just like, well, that's not my reality, but it doesn't mean I don't need the stuff. So we've really got, I think that's probably part of the problem, is that having to fit into this particular model, even though we're now talking about the social model of disability, it's still being governed by the medical aspect of disability, or the medical thought, which just doesn't, it's too problematic having both of those things working together, I believe.
You know, I actually, maybe they could get away with some of the medical model stuff if it wasn't something that we had to go through again and again and again.
Yes.
Like, you know what I mean? If there was some kind of, I mean, not that this would ever happen, and not that I'm advocating for it to happen, but if there was some kind of central database that kind of kept a record of where you're up to with your disability and blah, blah, blah. And, you know, I mean, that I could see there'd be a billion problems with that too. But it really gets exhausting having to talk through it all the time and what you can and can't do. And if you're having a good week, then you kind of feel like you have to pretend that you're not feeling good because people will judge you for
yes, exactly. It's like, you don't have a disability because you don't look bad. Well, that's and I think I'm lucky in that respect, being in with the wheelchair, because like people don't question me. Yeah.
Yeah, true. Although that's problematic in its own right, isn't it? Because people have made an assumption that,
Uh, yes. Yeah.
yeah.
I get the assumptions, and then I get the judgments, but I also have that privilege of being up, people seeing that I've got a disability. So it's like having a privilege, and then but the privilege being problematic. So that's a very
Yeah.
interesting one. Yeah. But like for me, for example, I know like with the parking permit, that I think they've caught on because the parking permits, you don't have to renew them as often now. But it's always like you still have to take this into to the doctor to say, yes, I've still got a disability, or, for the government, you'd have to fill out paperwork. Yes, I still have a disability and I was born with a congenital disability. So that's not going to change. So why are you asking me again and again if I still have a disability? Like, you haven't come up with a cure. So yes, I do. Yeah, so it's...
I have to do that with the kids too. There's some government paperwork where you have to, every few years, you have to have a doctor fill it out and say, yep, they still have autism. Yep, they still have these needs.
Yeah. I mean, and that's it. Like, if we could have, like, I know it's probably problematic, but if there could be something, I guess, like even with the my health record or whatever that thing is that they have it with the doctors. Yeah, if it could be something that just a tick box saying permanent, then that would be, that would just mean it would take away so many problems throughout. Yeah, absolutely.
And then you can actually look at what people can do and what supports they need instead of focusing on what's wrong with them.
Oh, yes. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I love the what's wrong, and it's been interesting. I read a lot of other people with disabilities who are like writing blogs and that, and talking about this. I've been so used to saying, I've been so used to being asked, what's wrong with you, that I've always just answered it. And now I'm really, really, I wouldn't say I'm sensitive about it, but like, please don't ask me. But I'm sort of more trying to get people to think about it a different way. And so, like, I guess I like to say that I've got a condition, and talk about it that way, as opposed to having, like, my condition isn't my disability. So I like to sort of separate those two things, and talk about the disability from the social side of things. Yeah. Oh, thank you
It's
so much.
interesting. I think we've been on the outskirts of a chat before about advocacy and what responsibility do we have to be advocates. And I guess in terms of my kids, I've always kind of had to be. But I think even if you want to be an advocate, you can for so long, and then after that, it's kind of like.
Well, I remember,
anyway, sorry to interrupt you.
No. I was just saying thanks for bringing up all these interesting points. Because I remember, like, a few months ago, I got someone said, "Oh, I love the advocacy work you're doing," and I'm like, and I just was like, I'm not an advocate, and it got my back up. Now it doesn't get my back up as much, because I understand why they thought that, and I can understand that, sure, I write about my experiences to the end. We talk about all these things with these podcasts. So therefore, that is a form of advocacy, because it's kind of making people aware. But it's not like I'm out there holding the signs and doing all that kind of stuff and writing to politicians. And I don't do any of that stuff. It's just, for me, it's just making people aware, because I believe that it's all to do with the grassroots, and that's where things, this is just my belief, but this is where things need to change, with the grassroots, making people aware, because it's the people then that feed back to governments, that kind of thing.
Yeah, we need all kinds of advocates.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think we need it at all levels. Absolutely. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Karen, for the talk today. It's been absolutely interesting just to talk about the different aspects of disability, and for people to see the different ways in how it affects everybody. And it's just been really lovely to talk to you. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
And just
excellent way to spend the morning.
Yeah, absolutely. And I also wanted to ask you, for people, if they wanted to follow you on social media, do you have any public social media accounts that you'd like people to follow?
I do, although at the moment, they're not very active,
Mm-hmm.
but they will be in the near future.
Yeah.
I've got a page on Facebook, Karen Hedley Consulting, and then
Mm-hmm.
I've also just set one up on Next Level Inclusion, what it's called.
Ah.
Yeah, because I'm hoping once I finish the role that I'm in now that I will be out as a consultant as you are, working on similar issues but from a slightly different
Mm.
focus, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Well, thank you again. It's been a really good, really great time speaking to you. And yeah, so you can follow Karen on those socials that she mentioned. And I hope everyone has a great week, and I'll see you all next week. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.